Do you have one message to anyone who is healing from their own trauma and or looking to do what you say so eloquently in your podcast and just move past it and help other people move past their particular trauma?
You're not your circumstances. And you can be both the author and the audience of your own life. And when you do, as hard as it is, it's worth it. It really is in the end. I wouldn't change a thing about my life. I know that's probably a very dramatic and maybe difficult thing to understand or to comprehend for a lot of people, but it's the truth.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in Richland County history. Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife Noreen and burying her body in the basement of his new home in Erie, Pennsylvania.
The 12-year-old son finally took the stand.
As I heard a scream, I heard a thud. It was about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
When I was 12 years old, my testimony sent my father to prison for murdering my mother. This podcast serves as a type of therapy and reconciliation for myself, and it is my hope that it helps anyone who has experienced deception, betrayal, and dark trauma. I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Murder. Hey movers, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Moving Past Murder. I'm your host, Collier Landry, and what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Oh, happy Friday. So glad to have you guys back. I have been working all week very diligently on a documentary project that has been a part of my life for the last 3 years. I've been wrapping it up with a dear friend of mine named Sharon Rocky Roggio, who's actually going to be on this program very soon. The film is called 1946. It is an important film that is coming out, and we are putting it all together. And it's amazing to see it come to fruition. It's been a long time coming. So I will have her on the program very soon. But this week I want to do something a little different. I had toyed around with doing an episode of the similar content, but I thought that this particular interview that I had done on a podcast called Sincerely Future You, hosted by a woman named Jess McKinley. She's a friend of mine. She's very cool. She actually recently got married and has a baby and another one. And she is a life coach. She is a business coach for female executives. And it has this wonderful podcast. And our episode was very, was really poignant. I said some really great things in it. And I thought, like, I wanted to talk about the same subject with you guys on an episode, which I might cover later on down the road. But I thought this was such a great interview, I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'm going to do that on this week's episode. But first, I want to get to a listener question. As I always do, you guys send in, I try to read all your comments on YouTube, your DMs you send me. For those of you that find me on TikTok, thank you very much. I read all of your comments whenever I can. And, and I really think it's valuable. And I love hearing your input on all the episodes that I'm doing. So thank you so much. Please keep that up. Please reach out, mpmpodcast.com. You can reach out to me on, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. At Collier Landry is all my social media handles. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My website, collierlandry.com, all that stuff, all the things for you guys. I just love hearing from you, and it helps make me make better content for you guys, my audience, and I love that. So this comes from JS on YouTube, and she said, now this is in regards to an episode that I did about my father sending me a letter where he discusses this very fantastical scenario where my mother was involved in a Chinese gold smuggling ring and a baby selling ring and sort of some pedophile activity of selling children. Just complete crazy talk is what I think the polite way of describing it is. The normal way that I would describe it is just bullshit. So I was discussing this, reading this letter and discussing my thoughts on it. And this person writes to me and she says, I think you put too much pressure on yourself to let things go. Your family abandoned you. And on top of that, what your dad is going to do to cause some feelings, to say the least. There's no excuse for what your blood relatives did and didn't do. None. Try looking at it from your mother's perspective. My ex-husband tried to kill me, and I promise you she was worried about how this would affect you and your sister. Would you hear that was what was happening, see it? Would he hurt you too? And who was going to watch over you when she couldn't? These people failed her in the worst possible way, and they were pretty much as bad in her eyes as your father was. How do I know that? I lived and my family bailed on me and my kids. I have a hell of a lot more anger towards them than I do my ex-husband. I think you can experience positive feelings for people like your adoptive family, but you don't have to make any excuses for all the people who failed you and your mother. You deserved better, and so did your mom. Wow, that is a lot. And as I talk about on the podcast, a lot about my family, both sides of my family, my father's side and my mother's side, not being there for me when it was the worst possible time of my life. And I don't harbor any anger towards these people. I have tried to reconcile with them over the years. Some do talk to me, but my mother's sister, who was very close to me in my life, I have not spoken to in 20 some years. It's unfortunate. It is not for a lack of me trying to bring these people in the fold into my life. But I feel like, would my mother be angry with them? Sure, of course I think she would. And am I angry with them? Yeah, but you got to let that shit go. That is my opinion on all of that. And that is, ties into this week's episode of Sincerely Future You, of what I would love to say to my 11-year-old self. And when I was going through the trauma of losing my family, not only losing my family, losing my mother, losing my father, losing where I grew up and my whole sense of normalcy, the whole world that I had become to know at that point in my life, losing everything, and then needing those people to be there for me through all of that. And I feel like a lot of people can carry a lot of this shit in their lives, and it can really take hold of you as you get older and as you become, I think if you become a parent, I am not a parent, unless a chihuahua counts. But I think as some people approach fatherhood or motherhood, they start to think about the trauma that has come to them in their life when they were younger and how their families behaved with them. And, a lot of people get angry and bitter, and I just can't get down with that. And, like I said, I'm not a parent, but I feel a lot of these things take hold. And what this episode of Sincerely Future You that I'm going to share with you guys right now is all the things that I wanted to say to that 11-year-old kid, 12-year-old, when I was going to testify against my father, and what that looked like. And what I would say now, which is, I'm still here, right? And I still feel like I'm leading a very positive life and doing very positive things and trying to influence the world around me in that small little, in that little microcosm of a way that I can. So on that note, please enjoy this episode, which I believe was recorded in March of this year, of the podcast Sincerely Future You with Jess McKinley.
Welcome to Sincerely Future You. We have an interesting show for you today. It's not my usual content, but when I learned more about my guest story today, I thought it actually would be very beneficial for you guys, especially if you're someone who has ever wanted to make a part of your personal life your business, but you felt very confused about where to draw the line to not get consumed with your personal life and not make sure that it gets too messy. So I have someone that I've observed from afar do this really well. And Before I go on, I do want to share a brief disclaimer. This week's episode will include a conversation about the loss of a loved one by murder. So if this makes you uncomfortable, no need to listen to this episode. Also, I will have some resources linked in the show notes, but I personally am very excited to bring you someone who I've recently come to know, Collier Landry. And here's a little bit about him. While most hosts of true crime podcasts simply discuss murders that fascinate them, Collier Landry, host of Moving Past Murder, has actually lived through one. On December 31st, 1989, when Collier was 11 years old, his father, Dr. John Jack Boyle, killed his mother, Noreen Boyle, and buried her in a crypt beneath the basement of their new house. Her body wouldn't be found until January 1990. The case became Mansfield, Ohio's crime of the century and spawned a Forensic Files episode in 2000, a documentary in 2018, and now Landry's own podcast, Moving Past Murder, which I highly recommend you go and check out yourselves. This has served as therapy and reconciliation both for Landry and listeners who are processing betrayal and trauma in their own lives. So, welcome, Collier.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. I know it's kind of unusual, maybe for both of us, for these two podcasts to come into light, but I did mention, and I only gave a very brief, I don't know how to briefly understate kind of the topic that you talk about on your podcast. So I want you to kind of take us back a little bit, and then I'd love to ask you some questions about the business end of it.
Sure. So as you said, when I was 11 years old, I heard my father murder my mother. The case was originally treated as like a missing persons case, and no one believed me. I knew my mother was dead the next morning. When I woke up, my father said, Mommy, I said, where's my mother? And he said, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier. And I'm like, and then went into this whole thing. We're not going to call the police or the FBI, which was super weird. My father is a narcissist and a sociopath and a psychopath, clearly. So what happened is I had contacted my mother's friends and I said, she's gone. Like, somebody call the police. Police came and they treated it as a missing persons case. Then a detective thought it was interesting and showed up to our house. And my mother's body was buried in a house in another state that my father bought for his mistress. So it wasn't in our home. It was in a completely other state. And what happened is I said to the detective, I pulled him aside and I said, my mother is dead. Don't believe my father. She didn't just get in a fight and they ran out. She would never leave me. He took a chance on me, like listening to this 12-year-old kid. Now, my father was a doctor in a very small town community in Ohio, where doctors are feted a lot of times and given a lot of leeway. And his police captain was like, you're crazy. This is a doctor. We're not going to take this on. He goes, yeah, but there's something about this kid. So over the course of 25 days, between my mother going missing on the December 31st and January 24th, when they found her body, he and I worked in tandem to find out what happened to my mother. What had happened is that I was thrown into the spotlight and both sides of my family abandoned me. My father's side of the family wanted nothing to do with me because I was the person who got the police that led them to arresting my father. I was the person who testified at the grand jury for his indictment. And then ultimately I testified at trial for 2.5 days and he is still incarcerated to this day and thrown to the wolves in the foster care system, and sort of just tried to sort all this out and muster the strength to testify and do what was right. And that experience, so that was about a 6-month time period of just being sort of isolated in foster care and having your whole world turned upside down. I mean, I was yanked out of my house, lost my dog, my friends, like everything was just a mess, right? As one could expect. One of the things that I always thought about, and especially after the trial, is, now I say this because this was sort of, now the narrative is sort of changing. We are becoming a lot more aware of the consequences of violence in the United States and around the world, right? And the impacts that these things have on communities, ancillary victims, this and that, right? But my opinion growing up was very much so that the victim is dead, the bad guy goes to jail, The state gets its restitution, the gavel hits, and we say next. And we never look at the consequences of these things and the actions that brought them and the impact and the devastation that these have. And so it sort of became my whole like life's mission, if you will. I went to music school, I dropped out, I moved to California, and I decided to become a filmmaker. And it was my goal to tell my story and to honor my mother and to start bringing these things to light.
So that was when you were around 21?
21.
When you created the documentary, when you started to dive into really taking this from your personal life to trying to make some sort of purpose and path for yourself with it.
Sure. Except I love that it was only 3 years ago or 4 years ago now. So if you say 21, I'm still 25, which I love. But no, it was everything takes a lot of time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really start into production until, I got investigation. I got a director on board, Barbara Koppel. She's won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries. And I brought on my friend John Morrissey, who produced a film called American History X, which is an amazing film about the consequences of violence. Stars Edward Norton, Beverly D'Angelo. He's a neo-Nazi.
Yes.
Investigation Discovery came on board, and then we made the film, and which airs on Investigation Discovery, Hulu, Amazon, blah, blah, blah. The thing is again about like I was saying, the consequences of violence and the impact that these things have, and like what happens, like what next, right? Moving Past Murder, the podcast, then became an extension of the film because, like I said, I traveled around the world. The film came out, then we had COVID, whatever. I spoke at universities, things of that nature. And then I was like, okay, now I want to reach the audience to show them, okay, this is what happened. This honors my mother, and now I've told the story. But now the next chapter of this is, sorry, I'm gonna get all emotional. The next chapter of this is to show people that you can go through extraordinary circumstances and survive or defy seemingly insurmountable odds and come out on the other side okay, like you're gonna make it, So that is what this whole thing, I'm just thinking about, okay, sincerely future you, right? So I'm a kid sitting in foster care. I have no family. I'm 11 years old or 12 years old this time now. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what does life look like? I've lost my mother and my father, my dog, my family. Nobody wants anything to do with me, right? And I'm wrapped up in this whirlwind of a. Sorry, I didn't expect to get this emotional. I'm wrapped up in this like whirlwind of a case in my hometown. Like, what is my life going to look like? And I just remember. I remember sitting in the bedroom and just kind of like in this really dark place. It's like, I would say like probably the nadir of my life. Right. And, I'm facing testifying against my father, which for a kid that has just lost everything. And for the fact that like, here's my father with his legal team and everything. And he's a doctor, right? So he has money, so he can just, he almost got away with it. And if it wasn't for my persistence with this detective who I literally annoyed the living what out of, they wouldn't have found my mother. And it would have been like and cases like this are littered through our society of just these unanswered, like, okay, somebody goes missing. Okay, well, I mean, look at Robert Durst. Like, this guy just passed away recently. I did an episode about him, but, they still don't know what happened to his wife. I mean, they can assume what happened. They don't have answers. These poor people for 30 years, like, have wanted to know where she went, right? Yeah. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself at like 12 years old, like, what is my life going to look like? Okay. If my father gets off, my life is over. I mean, my life as I knew it was already over. But this is a guy that I'm going to then go back to custody with, and he is going to either put me in a shallow grave in another home, or he's going to make the rest of my life a living hell. And trust me, even in prison, he's tried to do that. But the thing is I had to just go, okay, well, when I look back at this moment, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what am I going to say? And I said at that point to myself, I'm going to say that I did everything I could to be honest and to tell the truth and not back down to the fear or intimidation or just I was like, I'm going to do the right thing and I don't really care what the consequences are.
You know, I think you answered a question that I like to ask all of my interviewees, which is really like, if you as your future self now, who your present self could tell your past self, or if your future self, if you could talk to them, what would they say? And really, it sounds like you made a decision that I encourage all of my clients to make all the time, which is it might cost you greatly right now, whether that is emotional pain or whether it's something logistical. In your case, it cost you everything to stay in integrity with what you knew you had to do in order to live with yourself in the future. And it sounds like you did kind of, even as an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, have some sort of, whether it was conscious or not, conversation with your future self of like, is it now that I feel the pain or is it later? And either way, it seems kind of inevitable. Am I willing to sacrifice more in order to have myself that I can honor? And my mom, ultimately.
Yeah, and the thing is that, you know, it's just that. When I made the film, people were like, "Well, why did you make the film?" I said, "Well, I did it to heal myself." And I said, if I can change one person's life, I've done my job.
Yeah.
Because there's a kid sitting there, 12 years old, going through the same it's the same shit.
Yeah.
And he is literally staring down the barrel of like life going, I don't think I'm going to make it. And I wanted to tell that kid, who was me, you are. Like, you're going to survive this. You're going to get through it. I know it sucks and it's not easy and it is a grind. And sometimes you feel like, and maybe the truth is that it only gets harder. It doesn't get easier. You know, you, the more you delve into these things but you talk again about these conversations you have, like one of the things that I deal with, and I'm dealing with it now because as you know, I've been in several publications. I was just in the New York Post, just in the Independent yesterday.
I heard,
it was just, which is amazing for the podcast, you know, because this is the next genesis of what I'm doing, right? Or the evolution. But, you know, my family still remains completely disconnected from me. And there was a brief time last year where some of them reconnected with me, or one of them reconnected on my mother's side. But now they're just, it's just the same thing. And the message that I'm trying to get out to people is that you're faced, you have a choice to make. And you can either do the work and get through this, or you can let it control and destroy your whole life. And I have only seen that with like my family. And it is so tragic. And I want to scream half the time at the top of my lungs. Guys, I know that this sucks and this is so hard. But if anyone deserves to be pissed off and say F the world, it's me.
You.
And I don't. Like, I lost everything. And on top of that, you guys disowned me. A child who had nothing. I had nothing to do with my father. I have nothing to do with anything that he's done, nor would I. I'm sorry that I happen to be male and I look like my mother, not my father. And it was staggering to me. And as I started to get into adulthood, because it was already astonishing to me growing up, as I got into adulthood, and you get the age where you're having, well, I don't have children, but I have furry children, but but I don't, but you are of that age where you start thinking, oh, if I had to care for another being, or, I'm adopted and my adopted brother has three boys and they're my nephews. I cannot imagine something happening to my brother and his wife and me saying to those nephews, yeah, that's cool. Just, you'll figure it out. Like, that would be.
No. And I mean, it's obviously trauma is just doesn't even cover, I think, quite the word for what you went through at 11 and really continue to go through as you, like you said, go through the different geneses of reopening the wound for yourself, and then also sharing in a mission-driven way. And I don't know if you saw, I recently left your podcast a review that referenced two of my personal heroes, including Tara Westover and Norah Mcnerney. Are you familiar with either of them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I haven't read Educated yet, but I definitely want to.
Yes. So Educated, just as a backstory for the listeners, Tara Westover is the author of the world famous autobiography Educated, where she grew up with some crazy schizo, bipolar, undiagnosed parents that didn't believe in medicine or doctors or support the government. And they basically were raised in a cult environment, and she was not allowed to read or be educated. It was just very traumatic stuff that she went through. And that's just like scratching the surface of what it was.
Sounds like Christian Science.
There's all sorts of weird stuff that was going on there. And I don't even know if she had a label for it, but she managed to get herself out of that situation, which cost her relationship with her entire family, everything that she knew. And she was able to get to, I believe, Oxford. And she wrote this book that is so self-aware. And I just found that with you, for people who go through trauma, there's usually something about them that you can tell from an outsider talking to them, that they're in the trauma so much that they can't really see what has been happening in a clear and unbiased way. The way they describe it is purely from inside of it, and not from a lens of inside and outside. And I think Tara did it so well. And listening to you talk about your story and what you were able to do with the documentary and the podcast is so incredible. And I have people who have come to me. Norah Mcnerney is another person who her husband, died of a brain tumor, and she created the podcast Terrible Things for Asking.
Yeah.
Which you guys should all.
And it's a great message. And it's like, it's because it's real, it's authentic. And I think that, when people, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
All right. We're both podcasters. So like we have that desire to.
Well, I just wanted to, there was, no, I'm going to get emotional again. There was something, so I was screening this, I was screening the documentary in Cleveland, in Ohio, and it was for the Cleveland International Film Festival. I make this like cheeky joke while I'm up there after the film when we're doing this panel, and I said, oh yeah, I said this feels like like I'm on a panel at Comic-Con. Audience laughs or whatever. I'm taking more questions. This guy stands up and he's going to give a question. He goes, I don't have a question. I have a statement. He said, how you just said this is Comic-Con? He's like, let me tell you something, my friend. You're a real life superhero. And your superpower is how authentic you are. And how you've taken what you've done to be exemplary. And so this is not a rah-rah me thing, but it boils back to the message that you can either take these things by the horns and say they're not going to control you, or you just succumb to them. And for me, even at 11, 12 years old, I was like, future self may be saying like, look, this is not the way. And also like, this is not what my mother would want, and this is not life. This is not what life is about. And I think a lot of times like people will become bitter. Like, okay, so Norah, her husband dies of a brain tumor. It's easy to say, well, F it all. Like life is just, whatever. No, she does something out of it, and it's a successful podcast. And
like you said, I don't think she had the same intention of like growing it to what it is today. Sure. And same thing with you. It's like that starts out that seedling of, if I can just help one person.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, somehow make sense of and heal myself, that is going through this at the time while helping other people. That really is the point. And I think when you and Tara and Norah are able to be so incredibly brave mixed with self-awareness, it creates this magic elixir and this space for us all to really heal along with you and say, like, it's okay. There is, I mean, even for me, I have not been through a trauma, and I am so comforted by all of your willingness to continue to put one foot in front of the other after going through something that's unimaginable to most people. It makes me, I usually say all the time is to my clients, this podcast used to be about how feelings fit into business and about how important it is for you to understand your negative emotions and your positive emotions. And I said, for me, the more I experience a negative emotion, the more I show myself how unfuckwithable I am. Like, the more I just believe there's nothing I can't handle, even if it's on a small scale. And watching you guys do it on such a large scale, it has an impact not just to people who have been through trauma, but people who may have not had their trauma yet. You don't know what kind of an impact that conversation will have on their future self. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. It was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. I think that you reach a broader audience than you think. And I think that, you know, it's a little bit, I don't know the word, it's like unfortunately and fortunately trendy that the murder podcasts and the, like, people are interested and fascinated in it. And I think that, you know, your story though, it's important to people who aren't necessarily exposing themselves to that world. So
sure. You know, and I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for saying fuck, because now I don't have to pretend like I don't curse all the time.
My producers are not pleased with me every time. They're like, really, this episode's not going to be able to air in India.
I tried to do it. And I'm like, I can't talk. And then so I have a friend that runs a successful true crime podcast called The First Degree. Her name is Alexis Linkletter. And when she started listening to her podcast and she says, fuck it, I'm like, oh, okay. Thank God. She's like, yeah, just be real. And I'm like, thank God.
Yeah.
Like trying to say the F word. No, it's not what life is about. And I'm not going to be egregious about it, but
this is a sensitive topic and it's emotional. And I think it's important for us to let it all out there.
Absolutely. But it's interesting. So one of the things about my podcast is, yes, it's true crime, but it's sort of not in a lot of ways, even though I do discuss true crime. Yeah. And I have lived like the true crime life. Right.
Right.
And I did, I probably did what a lot of true crime listeners fantasize about, which I solved a murder with a police detective. It just happened to be of my mother by my father.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm, there are parts in the documentary and I'm sharing and I had him come to the school every day to talk to me because I wasn't safe at home because my father was there. Oh, he was traveling back and forth to Erie, Pennsylvania, which is where the house was.
How long did you live with your father before the trial, before you were pulled?
Well, I was 25 days. So he was arrested. I was yanked on January 24th, 1990 out of the house. And then they arrested him on the morning of the 25th because they dug up my mother's body that night in Erie. But I was going back and forth with him, and I would literally, my grandmother, who was my father's mother, was staying with us, and she was really close to my mother, which was odd. Not odd that they were close together, but odd because of the behavior that happened. But my father, she would get angry with me, and my mom had just bought a cordless phone, so I'd take the phone and I'd run with it and like hide. And a 75-year-old or 70-year-old woman isn't going to like chase a 11-year-old around the house.
Yeah.
Very successfully. So I would sneak this phone and hide, but I would literally like pull out. We had these bookshelves which had crawl spaces, and I would pull the bookshelves out when I'd sneak around and to like look to literally find my mother's body, like literally to see if she was stuck back there. Like these are the conversations that I'm having with a police detective when I'm 11 years old.
Yeah.
And there are, I guess getting back to my point is, it is true crime and this true crime life with the podcast, but it's also like a message of like inspiration and hope and bringing people on the show that, that have found ways to move past whatever this trauma is that they have, or whatever it is, not just specifically murder related or crime related.
So let me ask you, for those of my listeners who do have something that they went through that was a trauma, whether it's grief related or whether it is sexual violence or whatever the case may be, and they're listening kind of envious of your vulnerability and your willingness to kind of reopen the wound and still be able to focus your time and energy on this and successfully be able to make it your business, essentially. And I think that the word sometimes gets a bad rap. Any advice that you have for people who are like they really feel called to this mission, but they feel, I don't know, kind of hesitant or nervous to mix it into something that has to do with money or deals or publicity?
I mean, I think that was the Shakespeare quote, "To thine own self be true." I think vulnerability is a very now thing as it is. I think it's easier now than ever to be welcomed into the world expressing these vulnerabilities. And I think the time is ripe for that, for people that are struggling with incorporating that into their business, or they're struggling into to making a difference or saying anything or sharing their stories. I think now is a greater time than ever to have the courage to share these things, because people are so much more accepting of it. I think even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, look at the Me Too movement, right? Look at these people that have come forward, and look, there was just a settlement, what was it, yesterday or 2 days ago, with Prince Andrew and over this whole Ghislaine Maxwell thing, and over this, obviously him taking advantage of young women or underage. I mean, it just horrible, just evil in its most pure form, right? And there was the settlement, and what he's going to say, he didn't do this or that. And so, yeah, those things, despite the accusations, everything, people seem, and the settlements and things, people just go, oh, well, did it make any good? But yeah, you might feel defeatist about it, about your impact, but at the end of the day, you are making an impact. Even as small as it is. It's like, look, I made the film, and then I just, because I had to do it. And then
that's
the backlash, the whole response was insane. And yeah, I think that when I set out to do it, and I definitely had these things when I was a kid, and I was literally in that foster home, and I would say to myself, I'm going to stand on a stage one day, and I'm going to say these things to people, and I'm going to do it. And I remember when I first discovered TED Talks, I'm like, I want to do a TED Talk, and I want to speak to this, and I ended up doing it.
You always knew it was not something that came to you later. You always knew that kind of, you had it within you. Like you said, I made this movie because I had to. It was something that you felt like needed to get out of you.
There's no choice.
Yeah.
And I often say that with just an artist in general, because that's what I am at the core. I'm an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a filmmaker. I'm a cinematographer, photographer, et al. Right. But there was no choice. And I think that when there's no you just have to go with it, and you just kind of hope it works. You're like, yeah. I hope that this is going to be well received. I hope, despite there's a lot of stigma. I mean, there's a lot, I'll just give you an example of my personal life, and even just the quagmire that is my personal dating life. So here you have this guy, and you bring home to mom and dad, and you're like, yeah, and they go, oh, he's a handsome guy, he seems very nice, he's well spoken, what's his story? Oh, when he was 11 years old, his dad murdered his mother. Now, I mean, if I'm a parent, it's probably not the story I want to hear about my girlfriend, my daughter's new boyfriend or fiance or whatever.
Yeah.
So there becomes,
especially in the online dating world where they can Google you first.
For sure. Which I had on my dating profiles, literally put everything out there. This is me. You can search me. This is what I like. Here's a picture of me standing on a TED stage. Here's a picture of me in front of a movie poster. Here's a picture of just get it out of the way, because I don't want to have to look, I mean, honesty is hard for a lot of people, but I often equate the way I grew up, a lot of times and this especially came to mind, my sort of awareness when I started working in Hollywood, right? Whereas I was almost like a child actor, where child actors kind of often grow up in front of an audience and you see them evolve, right? And they were a little kid when they started the series, and then they're a teenager when it ends, right? And they're driving and they're dating, and they've gone through puberty, and you're like, oh, their voice changed. I sort of was that same way, even though my time in the public spotlight, as far as, because I testified at the trial live on television. So it was like a thing that doesn't happen, obviously does not happen anymore. And they, so I kind of grew up in that spotlight. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I grew up with this sort of stigma following me, and you just have to kind of have to roll with it. I mean, it still happens, and people are like, are you sure about that guy or whatever? I mean, I remember I was dating a girl and her family was like, oh yeah, he's got to be a murderer, just like his father. I mean, it's like, and I can be very defeatist about that and be like, okay, nobody's going to love me for who I am, and nobody's really going to care, and they're always going to judge me on what my father did, which may happen, but I have no control over that. I have nothing for that.
And that I just think is such good advice for anyone who does want to take their personal life and make it a part of their message and their mission for their business, is that ultimately, if you aren't able to separate out other people's thoughts and feelings and actions in response to your mission from the point and the purpose and who you are, then you shouldn't probably do it. Because at the end of the day, what you just said was the reason why I think that you and Tara Westover and Norah Mcnerney are so healthy in the way that you talk about such fucked up shit, is because you are able to put some distance between who you are as a person and what happened to you and what you're saying and what other people are thinking and what they're interpreting. And I think that, a lot of people have fear, and their biggest fear about going on and trying to pursue this mission that might really be on their heart. Like you said, they're an artist, they feel like they have to do it, but they're living in fear of what other people might think and or do in response of it. So you said that really well, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if my future self had said anything to me in that moment, I'd be like, you know what, bro? Nobody else is going to live your life but you.
Yeah.
You got to live your own life and just say, fuck it all. And I think that was just, and again, you don't say that in like an indignant way. It's not like an entitled thing. It's not like, oh, no, the world just hates. No. That's not what I'm saying. Because that's a pity party. And that's self-serving.
And that goes back to the parts where I'm saying too, where I don't see that in you. It's not coming from this victim place of like
sure.
me against the world and I'm telling you guys how it is. It really is self-aware. And it's also just cavalier about the things that are facts that other people might like. Just because they're facts does not mean that they're not difficult for people to process. And most people think like the way that I teach it as well, facts and circumstances are neutral. And then we have our story and our thoughts about the neutral things that happen. And like murder is bad is a thought that I am glad to keep. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to think. And I think that, there is that thing with sociopaths too, can just like look at things in such a neutral way, and they don't necessarily have that feelings part that comes.
No, don't get into it. They don't look at it in a certain way. I mean, that's a way to describe it so people can comprehend it that are normal people.
Yeah.
So sociopaths, and this is what I talk about in the TED Talk, is there's a thing called the mirror neuron system, which is our limbic system, right? Which is where is our ability to feel, to understand, to empathize with other human beings, right? 21 years ago, towers went down in New York, in lower Manhattan, and the world watched and just hearts broke, right? And we empathized and we tried to understand what happened and put ourselves on that level. Sociopaths don't do that.
They don't even have
it.
That.
It doesn't even occur. It doesn't even happen. And there was a very specific, so I'm filming this scene with my father in prison, right? I mean, this just shows you, this is like a textbook example. In the scene in the prison, I come into the room and my father is in a very like jovial sort of mood, or he comes in the room rather. I'm sitting there. And he has this very, "Hey, good to see you, blah, blah, blah," a little small talky, right? And then I hit my father with this statement. And I was saying this to Dr. Phil. I was like, I say the statement, and then all the room, it's like all the air got sucked out of the room. And it just like, it got real, like shit got real. As soon as I said this, I said, one of the things I've been interested in my entire life, ever since you murdered my mother. And literally, as soon as I said that to him, his whole demeanor changed. And it was the first time that I said that to him, like right there, because I'd been waiting for 26 years or 25 years at this time to say this to him, 26, 27 years, whatever it was. And his whole demeanor changes. But my father legit thought that I was making a film to help him get out of prison.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the sociopath brain, right?
It's all about them. It doesn't even occur to them. And so, so I'm done filming that scene. I'm looking at everyone, and he leaves. I'm just like stunned. I'm just like, can somebody just tell me that the same blood that courses that his veins does not course mine? Because I don't know. I was just really shaken up by it, because sometimes, you hear about these horrible things, and granted, this is my whole life, so I've known my father. But again, it's just, you kind of come to that realization that some people they're just like born evil. And like, you'll never, ever, as a conscious being, as a person who has empathy and the way that the world is and understands these things, ever be able to understand it. You're just not going to, and that's a good thing.
Well, I think
good thing to not understand it.
The moral here really is that you've proven, and I know I keep referencing Tara and Norah, and I'm sure there's countless other examples, that really trauma doesn't have to make you into a person who doesn't have humor, who doesn't have lightness to them, and who sees things in the same way as the circumstances may have set them out to see the world. So I just think, for those of you listeners, do you have one last message to anyone who is healing from their own trauma and or looking to really do what you say so eloquently in your podcast, and just move past it and help other people move past their particular trauma in a business way? I know it's a heavy question.
You're not your circumstances. And you can be both the author and the audience of your own life. And when you do, as hard as it is, it's worth it. It really is in the end. I wouldn't change a thing about my life. I know that's probably a very dramatic and maybe difficult thing to understand or to comprehend for a lot of people, but it's the truth.
No, I can see that you mean it when you say it. And I hope that this episode really resonates. And I just know that it will, because it's integrity, it's authentic. You can feel it through. And I know I get to look at you. And for those of you who are listening, know that this is also available on YouTube for you to just get to know Collier. He is a person with depth, like we all are. And for those of you who are listening that really are moved by this, I encourage you to go and check out his podcast, Moving Past Murder, and check him out. All of that information will be in the show notes. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Collier, for coming on the show and for being vulnerable. Honestly, I welcome the tears. I welcome the cursing. It's real life. We're human fucking beings. And the feelings part of it, it's what makes business, and the humanness is what makes business worth doing. And honestly, other than that, I don't want to do business. I don't want to give my attention, my energy, my money to someone who I feel like has an ulterior motive and is not really showing who they are, and that they can be affected, like you said, can be not just the author of their message, but can be the audience too. I thought that was so beautiful. I'm gonna be quoting that for a long time to come.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much, and good luck with, I know you've got a lot of big interviews and whatnot that have been on the docket, so just good luck. I think that what you're doing for your mom to honor her is brave and vulnerable and important. So thank you.
It's really interesting to hear myself go through all of that. And, you know, of course I get emotional because I always do and whatever. You know, I've said this many times on the program where I feel like I can look back on my life that I have created, but also on what I did when I was that young and everything that I've faced. And I think that the most important thing for me that I would say to my, as my future you, is just, you did the right thing. And I don't think I really realized that at the time. I knew it was the right thing to do. I didn't think about the repercussions of what I was doing, or the ramifications, or the, you know, the positive ramifications in this case. I mean, I guess that's a, you know, take that with a grain of salt if it was positive or negative. I mean, it was a very horrific situation, obviously. But I think that when I look back on that moment in my life now, which I do a lot, I just am very grateful. I'm really grateful that I did what I did, because I know that I can look at myself every day in the mirror and go, you did the best you could, and you took something that was a utter tragedy and tried your best to spin it in such a positive light. And for me, that's really all I can ask of myself, right? I mean, I'd like to be a lot more successful in my life, and, you know, in terms of things that I want to accomplish, or I like to do, but I do feel really good about where I've gone and where I've arrived and where I am and where I'm going, or actually where I am right now and talking to you guys. It's wild thinking back to that time in my life. I'm not going to lie. It's not triggering. It's not, but it is emotional. But I'll get into this a lot more, as I often do, of course. I guess I'm just glad that I had the integrity and I learned that from my mother, to like be that person for her in that moment. It's a cool feeling, at least now. So on that note, I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Murder. Thanks, y'all. This podcast is made possible by support from listeners just like you. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible. Find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Collier Landry. The film A Murder in Mansfield is available on Investigation Discovery, Discovery Plus, and Amazon Prime Video. This podcast is a production of Don't Touch My Radio in association with RSA Entertainment. Please visit mpmpodcast.com to show your support today.